There is a saying that says, how we see the world is how we will experience it. And it's true in leadership. How we see the world is how we lead as well.
What if there are things we never had the opportunity to learn? We've all been to school or training, but there are things they never taught us that actually make a powerful difference in life. I'm here to share with you all the pieces you've been missing: mindset, health, success, and more. And we'll all learn together from guests along the way. We may not have learned it the traditional way, but oh my goodness, let's keep learning how to do things differently. OMG Teach Me crew, hello, hello. I am excited to have this conversation today. Luann is going to be a fantastic guest. And here's what we're talking about. You've heard maybe a couple of recent Friday 5-minute Take 5 episodes about perspective and empathy. And I even have had listeners talking to me about how powerful this is. Well, we're going to dive into that a little bit more, and I'm going to give you, or Luann is going to give you, some tools on how to ask questions to help yourself pull out of a perspective that might be limiting you, to help yourself get your brain locked into creative mode, and to help yourself make some changes that might otherwise seem very difficult to do. So my guest Luann and I are going to talk all about this today. She is a native of Alberta, Canada, and grew up working on a farm and learned a significant work ethic that way. And now is one of only 1,600 master coaches certified by ICF, and she specializes in executive and leadership transformation through a mindset approach about bringing ambitions to life, being your best self, making better decisions, and putting the zest in life. And if you've listened to any of this podcast, you know I completely love all of that. Now, let's remember our lives exist outside of work as well. So Luann loves being a mom, a dog grandma. I'm a cat grandma, so I love that. Pickleball, dancing, running, nature, walking, and of course, family and friends. So let's take it away. Welcome, Luann.
Oh, well, thank you. It's really exciting to be here, Cheryl. And I love your topic. What we learn outside of school is just so perfect. Such a big part of life.
I'm glad, and that's so true, isn't it? Goodness, if we're not always learning, I think we're missing out on a lot. All right. Well, let's dive into learning. Speaking of learning, more about you, because first of all, I think that there's always something in our story that is a powerful reason why we end up doing what we're doing. So tell us a little bit, how did you end up working as a coach and specializing in the areas that you do?
Well, yes, I definitely was a career change for sure. You mentioned earlier that I was raised on the farm, and you know, it's very relevant because from a very early age, I had an incredible work ethic and work capacity. And so from an incredibly early age, I was all geared to I was successful in school, and that was my path was education, and then I wanted to work in healthcare, so I, took the training and the background and so on. And I was in middle management and administration in healthcare, and I really loved that work. But there was a restructure where I got a package because we restructured to the entire province. The significance of that is that if that hadn't happened, I'm not sure I would have made my career change, because I was geared and programmed for this sort of level of high achievement, and sometimes people refer to it as climbing the ladder type of thing, but I was quite enthusiastic about that. This change was completely unexpected. So as I did a bit more research and discovered how I could really expand the type of transformational work I was doing and do it more on my own, that was perfect. But I think the part that also comes into that is when I was making those changes, and I was all geared up from school and I had all these practices in my mind, but it was a lot of work. And I was working. And I thought, holy cow, I'm going to be exhausted at a pretty early age at this pace. And I started thinking about what is making me work so hard. Not everybody in the world works this hard. Why do I feel like as if this is my approach? Which led me to the path of coaching and mindset. And once I got on the path and I had some insights about, well, Luann, this could be why, because this is how you believe that you will achieve success. And this
Yes.
is the way you think you will. And it never even dawned on me that there were other ways until I started exploring it. So once I dived into it, you could say my appetite was literally insatiable. But I should not say was. My appetite is insatiable because the more I learn, the more I continue to learn.
Well, yes, I love that. And I can see why you're excited about the theme of this podcast, because I think I've talked about before, and we all fall into this trap sometimes, that, we grow up thinking that if we just get an A and we study really hard and then we work really hard, that's all we need to do. And that's how I thought as well, until I was like slamming against the walls of like a cage trying to figure out how to get out, which is similar to what you're describing,
Mm.
and realizing there was something different. So I appreciate that story very much. Yeah.
And I think the more that I learned about it, the more that I just like dived right into it because I thought, wow, this is like a treasure chest of learning here.
Yes.
And I could see how it related so much around me and it made such a difference. Like there's a saying that says, I really didn't realize how stressed I was until I wasn't. And that is so true. And I thought, I would not be happy with myself if I did not share this and if I did not help others with this, because I think it's human nature that we have this pattern that we don't really recognize we're in the pattern.
Yes. 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 I agree.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that's a good segue into what we're going to talk about. So maybe one way to describe perspective is recognizing that we're in a pattern. But let me actually ask you the question so that we dive into our topic today. So we're talking about perspective. What do we mean when we say that? Because I think we throw that word around a lot, but what would you say we mean when we talk about perspective?
What my experience is with perspective and how I see people commonly relate to perspective is that perspective is how we see the world and the situation. And perspective is influenced by our beliefs and values. So perspective actually really gives meaning and significance to a situation because the same situation can have very different meanings with people who have different beliefs and different values.
Yes.
So perspective is a bit of a blend, and it's ultimately what it tells us this is the driver. Like my perspective ends up driving us because we see it as typically as either a good thing or something that we need to correct. But that's how we see it. There is a saying that says, how we see the world is how we will experience it.
Yes.
And it's true in leadership. How we see the world is how we lead as well. So it's really interesting by working with the components that contribute to perspective, it's possible to have a completely different approach and to actually have a completely different experience.
Yes, and I was going to ask you, how does it end up that two people could be in the very same situation and they remember the differently, or they see it differently? And I guess that's what you're describing.
Yes, that's true. Because let's say, what we think of this sometimes as there are people who grow up in let's say, for example, very challenging family environments. And there are other people that grow up in very challenging family environments that handle it completely differently. And so sometimes people have a more of a challenge in moving beyond the experiences of that frustration and the anguish that comes with that. And other times people recognize it from a different perspective and they'll learn from it and they'll think, that was my past. It really doesn't have to be my future. Whereas another perspective is that was my past and therefore this makes me feel this particular way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So it is very possible to have the same situation be seen by two completely different people. It kind of reminds me, those illusionary pictures, the one where you can see the young woman and you can see the old woman in the same frame.
Yes, 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 yes. Good example.
And there will be a certain number of people that instantly see the old woman and a certain number of people that instantly see the young woman, for example. And that is so true. It's like we'll see this. And if we were to get into a little bit of this science wise, it's because from earlier experiences, we have what we would call triggers. Certain things will trigger certain memories, which will create another experience. So, in a nutshell, our mind looks for what we see now, and then it quickly says, where did I experience this before? So it relates us to this. And until we change the perspective of what we saw before, we say, yeah, I saw that before, but I see this differently now. So you can see how the same situation then it will not have the same impact on us.
Yes. And I think it's kind of our default to believe that if we come into an experience that feels very similar to one we've had before, that it'll probably be the same result, right? That's sort of the default.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a good word to use. It's like a default, contrary to, oh yes, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be a different way, right?
Yeah. And that takes some practice to switch that around.
It does take practice, and it's also kind of a little bit of sometimes of observation and learning with it, being open to that learning. Sometimes it's almost like we just almost get tired of a certain thing and we think, I don't have to have this anymore, right?
Right. So I was going to ask you, how do we develop these perspectives? And another way I like to think of it is actually like kind of putting on a pair of glasses, and through that lens is how we see the world. That helps me to picture it too. So I was going to ask you, how are these perspectives that we have developed? And I think you've kind of already answered that. It's experiences that we've had as we're growing up. Is that right?
Yes, it's experiences that we've had as we grow up. And it's experiences that had a significant enough impact that are at a certain subconscious level, it sticks. It's like the program that runs is the one that has the most emotional energy. So if it has zero emotional energy, it's not going to be an automatic pilot. But the ones that really triggered us and they have more emotional energy, they're more likely to become one of those automatic defaults. So we can tell them by what we think about, and we can tell them by what triggers us, what charges us, right?
Yeah. And it seems like maybe sometimes it might even be hard to recognize what it is that's causing that.
That's very true, because it can, well, I guess just in a nutshell, because the subconscious mind is literally 90% of the mind and the conscious mind is 10%. So the conscious mind is the one that makes the decisions and is doing like, I'll decide this or I'll decide that. But it's already filtered by the 90% belief. So we're making decisions that are filtered by those beliefs. So when they're so charged and they're running at 90%, the conscious mind doesn't have the same capacity to recognize, oh, I think that's a limiting belief. Like, that doesn't happen.
Right.
The belief just does the driving. And then we try to work with it from there. So we're reactive then instead of proactive, right?
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah.
But it's all possible to work with this. But it's just that's just a little bit of an understanding that this is how we can change it. Because sometimes we think we have a perspective. It seems like a perspective is like it's impossible, or I can't possibly see how I'll ever feel differently about this, because it has such an impact on us. Or we can think like, from where I am now, I can't see how I can ever get there.
Yes. And maybe we're kind of always, I'm going to say, holding ourselves back, but maybe we're not even realizing we're holding ourselves back. When I sat down to talk about hormone replacement therapy with naturopathic Dr. Gina Nick, that was episode 73, I didn't realize that not only would I learn more about that topic, I would also learn about an easy way to detox and supplement that can even help with hormone balance. Dr. Gina developed Best Daily Ever, and I have been enjoying them ever since we taped that episode. I'm not going to say no to antioxidants and nutrients, including and glutathione that support my immune system, energy, hormone balance, and overall wellness. Find Best Daily Ever at www.omgteachme.com/recommendations and try them for yourself. I know you work a lot in executive coaching, and so maybe it's an office scenario where someone is wanting to move up the ladder, but they sort of never think they can do it. What are some ways that we can try to change our perspective or grow our belief to move past that?
Well, there's several ways. There's some kind of easy ways that we can use in sort of everyday situations. Sometimes a process like that takes a few more steps and a little bit more time. And at the bottom of everything, we would look at, what do I believe that makes me think this is not possible? Because on the contrary, if we have a dream, we definitely can achieve it, because our dreams don't go to other people. They come to us. And the only way they can come to us is if there's some way for us to be able to achieve them. So we can. So then we think, well, we could, but what's in my way of understanding that I could achieve it? And then it's because of this, or because of this, or because of this. And then we would work with those beliefs to get to the kind of the bottom. And that's where I work with NLP, and it kind of neutralizes like the triggers, if I may describe it that way. When we work with that, we change the triggers. But another way that we work with it is with questions. So when we're in a limiting belief, it's kind of like the shutdown part of our brain. It's like a limiting belief is kind of triggering that cortisol that shuts down the creative thinking part. And so it's really hard to come up with solutions, because the solution part of our brain is kind of, it's not working because the cortisol is like constricting things. And by the way, this is a very fundamental layperson's kind of description and explanation. So a science person would be disputing this right now. It's just this is a simplified explanation.
That's what we want. Keep going.
So then we want to see, well, what is it that's shutting it down? Like, what is it that makes me shut that decision creative making part down? And one of the tools that we can use to open up the creative part is a question, because another function of the subconscious mind, and I just like to teach the functions of the subconscious mind so we can use them. A function of the subconscious mind is that if it asks a question, if a question is asked, the subconscious mind has to look for an answer. So that will instantly change the cortisol chemistry, like instantly, into the question, which opens up the solution part. And it allows someone to think, well, maybe there's one possible way that I could do this. Kind of like a crack in the window. If there's one possible way, might there be another possible way? And so by continuing to kind of work with that, sort of, if we can say that, I call that the red brain and the green brain. The green brain is the solution part. The red brain is like the shutdown part. If we can continue to stimulate that, we'll see, oh, there is a possibility. I might not totally believe in it yet, but at least I've cracked the door open a little bit.
I really like this. And if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is, for example, maybe we're spending a lot of time saying to ourselves, well, why can't I get that? Or why can't I do that? Why can't I do that? And that's not what we want to be asking, right? We want to switch it.
I want to switch the question to a solution question. So another question is, what would make this possible? Or another question is, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And one of my favorite questions is, how is this exactly perfect?
Ooh.
I love that question, because that makes me think of, well, maybe I'm working through something. Maybe something is unfolding. It makes me think of the bigger picture rather than focusing on the sort of the restriction that I'm kind of focused on in that moment. So all of those questions change how we see the situation. And once we see the situation, we will experience the situation differently. And I think that gets to kind of the root of it all, where if we see the situation and we can experience the situation, that's where we're more proactive. We're not relying on the outside world to have this thing come forward to us.
Hmm.
Whereas when we're in a limiting belief, typically it's because the outside world has a stronger grip than our inner world of being able to see what's possible. So we're actually reacting to something in the outside world, typically. These are generalizations. So,
Yes. Well, and we have to speak that way, I suppose,
yes,
anyway, in this case. But I'll tell you something that, so I wish I could remember who said this to me. I would quote them. But somewhere along the way, someone said to me that if you say that you can't grow your business because the economy is in a downturn, that's not true. You're just letting the outside world affect you and you're reacting to it. And that particular
yes.
example to me was very powerful because it seems, of course, like that would be true, you know? But it's, you can do whatever you want if you just think creatively, is what they were saying.
Very true. So it's like, how could I how can I make the situation that I'm in at the moment? What's the silver lining of this situation? Like what's changed about this that if I change my business, I can actually optimize my business through this change?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yes, so that would be the question. So if this whole outside world has changed, how can my business benefit from this outside world change, right?
Yeah. And maybe it's hard to come up with the answers at first. I'm guessing that could be the case sometimes.
Yes.
And that's okay. I'm assuming you're going to
That's
say.
completely okay. It's a start and sometimes that leads us to thinking, well, what's one possible thing that would work better under these circumstances? Like what's one possible thing?
And maybe one thing doesn't feel overwhelming. So you try that and then you think of another thing.
Yeah, like what and then what's one step that would take for this?
Yeah.
And, how could this work better under these circumstances, right?
I'm seeing the power of asking ourselves questions for sure. And listeners, maybe you are sitting thinking to yourself, as I am, how could it be that simple? But what a cool thing that we have the power to just ask our brains different questions and it changes our perspective completely.
Once we change our perspective, there's so many things that open up to us. So the thing is we will always encounter the challenges from the outside world, like always. And sometimes from our inner world, from ourselves. We just don't have to stay there.
Hmm.
They will always show up. Like that's life.
Yes, it is.
That's life and that's being in the world and that's how everything evolves and we're going to encounter them. We don't have to stay there though when they show up, right?
And I really think you could apply this to any area of life because I am someone who I kind of tended to lean negative. I complained a lot. I really had a long path learning how to stop doing that. That's a topic for another day, I suppose. But once I learned how to turn it off faster and I understood the effects, I could do it in a lot of areas of life. And I think this question idea people could use in a lot of areas of life too, because we just chew on, well, that's not fair and why not me, and this negative stuff all the time.
Yes, and it's so interesting because especially in dealing with rejection, because I work a lot with people that are in many aspects of change. And so one of the things that is harder to deal with at first is that rejection. But I've often said there is no such thing as rejection. It's simply a redirection.
Mm,
You just got redirected.
I like that.
And I've also heard it, you didn't get rejected, you got protected from something.
I like that even better.
Yes. Well, we do get redirected, and we often, in my opinion, I think we got redirected from something that possibly wasn't going to work out really well. And we just got shown that a little bit earlier than we expected.
Yes. And honestly, this is why I ask people for their story in the first question of an interview, because, and I heard it with you, you said that, and I might not quote you exactly right, but you said that a job had not worked out and you probably wouldn't be where you were today if that hadn't happened. And that is such a common theme, that something goes the way we maybe didn't think it was going to go. And wow, are we lucky that that happened in the long run?
Oh, isn't that so true? I have really enjoyed my role, but I also see how much more expansion and growth and just pure fulfillment I have in this. This is not work for me. This is beyond work. it's
I
it's
love
very
that.
it's like being in the zone kind of thing. And I enjoyed my work before, but I don't know that I would have ever felt this fulfilled. But I wouldn't have just left there if I wasn't nudged, so to speak.
Yeah, it's so interesting that that's the case. And it's the case for so many people who go on to do amazing things. And maybe I should just put in a little caveat here, because if you're listening to this and you're going through something that is really traumatic or tragic, we're not trying to make light of that.
No,
There are
we're
hard
absolutely
things.
not. There
Yeah.
are very hard things, and that was a very challenging time. And I definitely didn't expect to come out of it in a way that felt very good. It felt like the mountain was much bigger than me, and those are very real feelings. So they're very real. So I appreciate you recognizing that, because I don't want to discount it or make it sound like it's like so easy. It takes work, but what I'm saying is it's possible. And it's possible for it to get easier.
Easier. Yes.
Yes.
And it could be as simple as asking ourselves different questions about the situation. Excellent.
Yes, because the different questions begin to create a little different insight and a little different outlook on it. So I find then, because when that is initially happening, it is stressful. And when we think of the impact of stress on our body, it's difficult to navigate at our best and be our best self to navigate it
Hmm.
when we are that under that much stress. It is a challenge, but there are ways we can gradually manage this so that it doesn't mean that the situation has become wonderful, but we manage it differently so that it is a better experience as we manage it.
Yes, absolutely. So let me kind of wrap this up. So if there are many ways that we could go about changing our core beliefs and our perspective when we decide
Hmm.
we want to do that. And we're saying that one way is asking questions. You mentioned NLP. I feel like that's a whole nother episode, maybe.
Yes.
I think that probably is. So stay tuned, listeners, sometime in the future. But asking questions to ourselves that are different, that get our brain working on some positive things. So, can you say for us again a couple of sample questions so that it's easy for everybody listening to remember as we're wrapping up?
One sample question is, let's say, how is my dream possible? Like, what is possible for my dream to come true here? Another question is, how can this get better?
Love it.
And another question is, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And I mean, what would I do in this same situation if I wasn't afraid, or if I didn't have this belief? Like, what would I do different?
Would it be valid if you have someone in your life who always seems more courageous than you? Although it's probably not true, but would it be valid to say, what would she or he do? Is that helpful or is that
Yes,
not?
that's another good example. Yes. What would one of my mentors or my role models do?
Yeah.
And then the other one that I mentioned that I like is, how is this exactly perfect? Because quite often when we get on the other side of managing the situation, we see, wow, I'm a different person from learning a whole new level of tools and skills and understanding and wisdom than I was before.
I love it. Okay, well, that gives our listeners some things to take away and chew on. Try it today. Something that's bothering you. Ask yourself, how is this exactly perfect? And see what your brain comes up with. I love that. You never know what the brain might come up with. Okay, well, tell us, how can people connect with you or find you online?
I think the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, and the spelling of my name is pretty unique, so I'm pretty easy to find. And I'd love to connect with anybody who wants to have another more of a conversation or any questions.
Perfect. And I will put that link in the show notes so that it's easy too. Okay, awesome. Well, we come to our last question now, and that is for our Spotify nostalgia playlist. What is a song that comes to mind when I ask you for a song that has happy memories attached or a feeling of nostalgia every time you hear it? What would you pick?
I think one of the songs that moves me the most is the song "Stand by Me."
Ooh.
And I love that song. And it reminds me of, the true value of relationships and growth, and how so many times standing by someone and being with someone is just the most powerful thing a person can really do. And if you've ever had someone stand beside you through something, it's an extremely powerful feeling. And I love that song. It literally gives me chills when I hear it.
Oh, well, and you heard me go, oh, because I love that song too. And it just hit me kind of in the heart when you said that. So
Yeah.
love it. Great
Yep.
choice.
I love that song.
Well, thank you for joining me today. And I know that people are going to walk away with something that they can try right now for a situation that's maybe bothering them or a situation that they want to look at differently. And I really, really appreciate that. So it's been fun to talk.
Yes, it has been really fun. I really appreciate it. It was an honor to share this with you, and I just love the love the theme of your podcast. What we don't learn in school.
Thank you so much. Awesome.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. OMG, did you know that we have mini episodes every Friday as well? Make sure to follow OMG Teach Me in your favorite podcast app so you get all the goodies. And if you're just finding this podcast and you're kind of wondering where to start, I have a curated mini series for you to help you stop self-sabotaging, because we all do it. So head over to www.omgteachme.com and sign up when you get the pop-up box. We may not have learned all these things in school, but they sure are powerful now.